The PWHL takes over the Pacific Northwest, and we have a new team at the top of the table. All of that and a few exclusive interviews coming up on today's Women's Hockey Report.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, WOHO Women's Hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your team or your favorite genre of sports, Rachel? I don't know. Every single day. Yeah, we'll go with it. Of course, we bring you women's hockey, the Women's Hockey Report every Saturday morning. Erica L. Ayala here alongside Rachel Donner. And, we have so much to get into. It's jam-packed. We have exclusive interviews. But as always, Rachel, let's do a vibe check. I know you've got a special day coming up, but what are the vibes as we get ready to talk about some women's hockey?
Yeah, we're going to talk about Montreal. And right now I'm kind of feeling bad for their fans in a way because they're like on the Takeover tour and none of this is happening at home for them.
We are definitely going to talk about that. They are the road warriors for sure on this PWHL Takeover tour. And I'm feeling pretty great. I got to go to the first stop of the PWHL Takeover tour. I'm repping my 206 Seattle hoodie. The pucks, Rachel, sold out within 15 minutes. I had no chance trying to get from the press box, getting ready, doing my interview with Jessica Campbell, which will give a little tease and show and let people know how they can watch the full thing. But let's get right into it. You mentioned Montreal, and they have been able to collect points in their last, I think it's 6 straight games. They haven't won outright all of those games, but because they've been able to collect points, Rachel, they now find themselves at the top of the table.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And I think that Montreal to me is a very scrappy team, right? They're a team that's finding ways to win, whether it takes extra time or a shootout or not. And they have only one regulation loss the entire season so far. And that's obviously better than any other team in the PWHL. And I think scrappy is my watchword with them because they you definitely think they're out of it. And then all of a sudden, and that's why you have greats like Marie-Philippe Poulin on their team, right? They can pull something out of their hat and make it happen for Montreal. But that's why I think, right now they're just the fun team to watch in this league.
Yeah, absolutely. Never out of it. And, I got to spend some time with the Montreal team in Seattle. They had their practice at Kraken Community Iceplex, which is the practice facility of the Seattle Kraken. One thing I loved, and they played the Boston Fleet in Seattle. They actually lost in OT shootout. We'll talk about that a little bit later on the show. But one thing that I loved is that both teams were not used to and I don't know if this happens everywhere. I've been to a New Jersey Devils practice. I think also a Nashville Predators randomly practice. That's back in the NWHL days. I think they were just about to be the PHF. Anyway, everything's a blend of time. But so in Seattle at the practice facility, fans come to practice and they cheer for everything. They cheer when the teams hit the ice. They cheer when there's a save. They cheer when there is, a goal. They cheer when the team gets off of the ice. And I think it was the Boston team that was kind of saying, Courtney Kessel saying, well, we're just going to start piping this sound into our practices to motivate our players. But great reception. Again, we'll talk about the Takeover tour. But what stood out to me with Montreal specific outside of that little anecdote is that this is a team that knows that they haven't hit their peak. They know that there's still a lot of things that they have to work on in their practice. They worked a lot on special teams, which was a factor in their first two.
Most definitely.
Was a huge factor in their first 2 Takeover tour games. They also focused on breakaways. Laura Stacey had such an awesome breakaway. It just barely stayed out of the net against Boston Fleet. And they practiced the shootout, all things that, again, they had to go through in a game scenario to be able to, as you said, ensure that they weren't getting a regulation loss, which thus has propelled them to the top of the table because they're collecting points in all of their games.
Yeah, and we've seen, of course, across the league, so many games going to overtime, so many games
Yes.
going to a shootout, and you have to practice these things. And I think, you do see frequent breakaways during the games, but it's just different when you do it in a shootout scenario versus, in the run of play. And I think it is important for teams to practice all these things. So I'm glad that Montreal is on top of things on that point.
Absolutely. Yeah, they definitely were. And again, they know that there are still habits that they need to refine, but I think it was Laura Stacy who spoke to us and said, there's a lot of belief as a team, there's a lot of support, and she also had glowing things to say about the next person that we're going to talk about, one Mikaela Grant-Mentis, aka Bucky. Now, we would have talked about Mikaela Grant-Mentis before Rachel, before the Women's Hockey Report was its own show, when we were doing the Spotlight, Women's Hockey Spotlight with Gil Martin, because she got dropped like a bad habit from Ottawa. Very surprising. And it seemed like it was a little bit controversial. Ottawa didn't say much. Mikaela Grant-Mentis has not said much other than she was quite surprised and effectively didn't like how things went down. So she comes to Montreal last year and is in the middle of the season. And so we got to catch up with her in Seattle about what the transition has been like and how she used her off-season time, knowing that at least she was hopeful that she would be able to remain with Montreal. We'll also hear from her head coach, Corey Chevery, about what she brings. Now, this is a fourth liner, but a very key and important part of this Montreal team. So here's Bucky.
Is also different. You're coming into a new team for a new year. What have been some of the things that you've been able to do with this reset with Montreal and just getting back to your game?
Yeah, I was super lucky to get to come to Montreal halfway through last year, and to start this year like brand new with them, I think was really good. I got to learn everything the same as all the other new players from the start, and I think just getting, with the team, getting the coaches, figuring out everyone's style was definitely easier this year than it was last year, but I'm grateful to be here, and I'm happy that, I was able to stay in Montreal.
I just want to ask you about Mikaela Grant-Mentis. Came to the team, in the middle of last year, is back with the team this year. What have you seen as far as the growth there, but also what she's able to offer to the forward core?
Yeah, the way that she sees the game is amazing. She sees the open ice. She's able to find it. She times possession really well. She brings a lot of offense to our team. So, we love having her. She's been great in learning our systems pretty quickly, and she gets rewarded with the offensive looks that she does have. And, we're fortunate to have a player like her on our team.
You mentioned the fans coming to a practice, cheering you on. Have you ever had that before at any level in your career?
Unless you're talking about my parents in the stands. Nope, definitely not. It's nice to see. It's nice to see that people, are enjoying us here. And, we're in Seattle, which none of the teams are from, and there's jerseys and stuff in the stands, so it's nice to see that.
And with that, would you be surprised to know that there's been a Women's Pro Hockey to Seattle campaign that is years in the making? It actually predates the PWHL.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised. I know Seattle fans are kind of really died hard for any sport they have here, and you can tell just by the NHL games that they're really pumped for their sports, and it's kind of like the same as Montreal. Whatever team they have, they're going to get behind them. So I think it's a long flight to get here to Seattle, but it definitely would be a cool spot to play in.
And then finally, coming back to this Montreal team, where do you like where the team is at, and what are some of the things that the team still wants to focus on as you get deeper into the season?
Yeah, I think we're still working to be better. Every game we're getting better, and it just depends on the teams that come to the game. No matter what team you're playing against, you can win or you can lose. It just all depends on how you show up, and I think we're just trying to stick to our consistency and our structure, and just make sure that we have that every game to to come out with the W.
Oh, Mikaela Grant-Mentis, aka Bucky, right there, Rachel. I mean, again, so much in that clip, but Corey Chevery mentioning that Mikaela Grant-Mentis has effectively like a really good knack for offense, and that was proof positive in the Vancouver game where she really got things started for Montreal.
She did. And, that's something we've seen throughout her entire career. Like when she was in the NWHL, PHF, like that was her standout bread and butter with
Yep.
Toronto and with Buffalo. So it's not a surprise to me to see that continue in the PWHL. And, she does have 5 points in 8 games. And for a bottom sixer, like that is a remarkable accomplishment.
Yeah, and I think it goes to the depth. And I think we talked about this. I certainly talk about it on Locked On Kraken, but I think the teams that are able to really sustain a full season and then a deep playoff run have multiple players that maybe are not always making the flashy play, or I think it was called, right, the Marie-Philippe Poulin goal was they called it a superwoman goal because she's like falling backwards while trying to shoot forward. Um, you know, but you need players like, of course, who wouldn't take Marie-Philippe Poulin? But you also need players like a Mikaela Grant-Mentis that can make the right pass, make the right move at the right time. And, early on in that game, she gets an assist, she gets her own goal, and then that sets up, again, Montreal to make their push later in the game. Montreal unfortunately did not win in Seattle. I think Seattle fans were a little bit split actually, but whether they just were hating on the city of Boston or wanting to root for a
Listen,
US based team.
relatable.
I thought you might like that. Laura Stacey and Abby Barine got those goals. And I really think Montreal would have probably been able to hang on and win this game, but they gave up really costly. Again, timing is everything. They give up pretty costly power play goals to Boston, who, they really took that opportunity. But again, as we mentioned, they did get that win against Toronto. Oh, man. But I will tell you, Montreal, you got to work on that PK because Daryl Watts just walked in, had all kinds of space and time. You cannot give a player like that so much space.
No. And that's why I say, like, I would say nobody in the league is playing complete games consistently at all. Nobody is. But I think, like, those are the little things that get you to a point where that could make or break an individual game for you. And those are the things that all the teams have to button up. But Montreal has been able to like overcome that a little bit more than some of the other teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, their streak of being able to get points is really what makes the difference. As you mentioned, only that one regulation loss. They sit at the top of the table, 17 points. Right behind them, the Minnesota Frost. Ooh, things might be icy though for Minnesota. Injuries have definitely hampered what they have been able to do. The win percentage, 708 for Montreal. Everyone else in the top 4 is hovering at about 500. And then there's Boston, who did get that win, but they've got a lot of work to do, and I think they know it.
Oh, yes.
And then the Toronto Scepters as well, who we've talked about. So, yeah, very curious. We'll get to our game that we have circled later in the episode. But coming up, let's break down a little bit more of the Takeover Tour experience, at least through my eyes in Seattle. We also will go over what we know from the Vancouver game. And I know a lot of people want to know about expansion. We got to speak to Amy Shearer, who is the VP of Business Operations for the PWHL, and we'll get a little insight on where the RFP process is and maybe what are some of the things that make it maybe not impossible, but definitely more difficult, Rachel, to commit to a city or more specifically to an arena. All of that coming up on today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report.
From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-day parlays, and so much more. On the NHL side, you can bet on who's going to start the scoring for the evening, most total goals by a team, and total goals for the league for that day. Just visit fanduel.com to join and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's fanduel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Thanks as always for tuning into the Women's Hockey Report. We just mentioned FanDuel. Also want to mention, Rachel, FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the PWHL. So if you're watching the games, whether on national TV, if you're in Canada, or streaming like Rachel and I on YouTube, then you'll see some of the FanDuel odds for the PWHL up there as well. Okay, speaking of business, right? Sponsors, see what I did there? Sponsors business. We know that the PWHL Takeover Tour, Rachel, in part is to not only activate fans that don't have their own team. There's only 6 teams, and there's a lot more than 6 cities in the United States and Canada, North America. But it's also, it's kind of a little bit of a testing ground. Now, I know you are not thrilled that Pittsburgh is not on this comprehensive list. The PWHL and so many other iterations, including international and college, have stopped at Pittsburgh, but in 2025, at least, no Pittsburgh on the list. But I do think that from what we've seen so far, the PWHL is getting a little bit of that excitement and buzz that came from the start of last year, the inaugural season, and all of the records. They're getting a little bit of that with this takeover tour. And in some ways, I think that's smart, because you and I have talked offline and briefly on the show about how we want to have a conversation about what attendance is like, because the attendance numbers are different from the inaugural season to this season, that's for sure. However, I do think from a business perspective, it seems like this takeover tour is going to help the PWHL be able to at least be in that catchment area of some of the attendance that they saw last season.
Yeah, and we've seen attendance drop a little bit in Boston and New York, and there's different venues in some of these cities as well. So that's always an adjustment, and which fans can make the effort and get to the games in time changes when you change venues. And so that does take time. And obviously, New York being the market it is, like, they're going to keep a team there no matter what. It just seems like, the right thing to do just from a league wide perspective. And it is like really interesting how vast this takeover tour is, given that they're only in their second year and they're spending so many of their games not in those home venues that they're trying to establish. I find that it's like a really interesting business choice that they've made.
It really is. And that's definitely the other way to look at it. For example, and shout out to Striatic who put this on my radar, but Erin Ambrose was recently on a podcast, I believe, with Jeff Merrick, and talking about how the least favorite part has been, first of all, they were only able to take a carry-on suitcase. They're on a 10-day road trip. They have 2 takeover tour games in the books, which we talked about. They've got another 2 coming up, which we'll talk about in the next segment. So they're definitely, and even Bucky said, Montreal to Seattle is a long trip there. So they're definitely putting the players through their paces. And I think it's interesting to see if this model is going to bear fruit, as far as, are they going to get some of these big cities? What will that look like in the future? But also, what is is this sustainable from a player perspective? Because we know this is not a women's hockey league or a women's league period that's doing just kind of weekends. We've seen that before, certainly in hockey.
Right.
But even the WNBA and the NWSL and these leagues are 10 plus years. I mean, almost 30 for the WNBA, but they've over time gotten away from just being kind of these weekend leagues, and have now regular season games throughout the week. They're also playing in the summer, so it's a different market. But we wanted to tee that up because we are going to hear from Amy Shearer, and then we also have a clip from Jessica Campbell, just a little snippet from her perspective as someone who is on the NHL side now. She is the first ever full-time woman to serve as a coach, an assistant coach in the NHL with the Seattle Kraken. She's a former women's hockey player herself, played with the national team. She has a really fantastic story about making her senior team after being at Cornell and just really giving it all she's got. So we're going to first actually play that clip from Jessica Campbell, just giving you a little bit of that. And if you want to watch the full interview, you can check that out. It will be on the Locked On NHL channel, and we'll link it in the show notes for those on video and audio. So let's hear that little snippet from Jessica Campbell. And then we're going to hear from Amy Shearer, who again is the VP of Business Operations at the PWHL, Rachel, to circle back to that conversation about what is the business case for this takeover tour, but specifically, what will expansion look like? So first, here's Jessica Campbell. I got to sit down with her in Seattle. And I want to take you back to what was a special moment, I think, for a lot of people that were able to be here at Climate Pledge Arena. I love the story about how you picked your outfit. That was fantastic. But the crowd really embraced you for that first home game, afternoon game here at Climate Pledge Arena. What do you remember about that moment?
Yeah, obviously, very special moment for my family. All my closest friends, former teammates, all flew in from all over North America, and just to have everybody together to just experience that moment. I think it really just hit me, when the crowd started cheering, of really my role and what this means to sport and to our industry. And sometimes, and naturally and probably to be assumed, like, I'm so much in my job, and you don't think about and wake up thinking of the things that, maybe were felt in that moment. Just go about my work, tie up my skates the same way every day. And so to experience the energy, the reaction, I think it hit in many ways, just the magnitude of how much this means to our sport and to the fans, and what that speaks to them, and, whatever walk of life they come from or position they're in. I think there was a little piece for everybody in that moment, and that was really special for me to get to experience.
For sure. I mean, it was special for a lot of people, myself included. You mentioned like former teammates were there. I randomly saw Gags, walking into CPA, Alyssa Gallardi. And so, I mean, you have been able to just bring so many different worlds together. You're an entrepreneur, you've played in the women's game at the senior level, of course, in the NCAA. So when you think about this moment now, the PWHL Takeover Tour 2025, right here at Climate Pledge Arena, where you call home as an assistant coach, it just seems like your worlds are converging yet again.
Yeah, honestly, you hit it there. Worlds are converging, from seeing former teammates, some best friends of mine, getting to welcome them here into what feels like my world now and my place. Obviously, it's so special because that converging and the two coming together just goes to show how far we've come. And I'm so excited. I'm so proud of the girls. I'm honestly honored to get to be part of it in this way, because I feel like I've been also trekking on towards my own goals since playing as a coach, and to get to come together now and to celebrate really how far they've come as trailblazers, continuing to stay in their mission of getting a pro league, and to get to now play in a fantastic crowd, in a community and a place that's welcoming them with open arms. For me, I think as an outsider, seeing that it's so special. It's going to continue to grow the awareness, and the great product that they put on the ice that's always been there, but now is getting the deserving attention that it's always needed.
And then finally, we'll get you out of here. I know you've got a lot to do before the puck drop, catching up with teammates, but I've heard you talk about the language of hockey and it just being something that's so universal. Hockey players, hockey fans, hockey coaches. You say certain things and everyone's like, all right, we're locked in. So I'm curious to know, what's your favorite hockeyism? Like, do you have a favorite phrase or word that you use? And then also want to know, what's your favorite chirp? Because I hear you might be a little bit of a chirper.
Oh boy, I wonder where you get that from. Gosh, favorite ism. I don't know. I feel like that's a loaded question. There's so many ways to go. I'll have to think about it. Let's touch base on that.
All right,
Or
we'll
I'll
come.
tweet it out at you.
All right, we'll circle back.
Yeah,
All right,
retweet this.
all right,
That's
and
the right one.
all right,
Is it
chirps.
Chirps. You know, I like to just, from a skating coach, remind the guys to bend their knees. Sometimes that's about working harder, skating faster, but it's also, you know, early on, non-pros are learning how to bend their knees to skate fast. So sometimes it's a good chirp at them to get them, just to put them back in their place a little bit and keep them on the ground.
Get them back to basics, like dig into it. Let's go. I love it. Well, Jessica Campbell, thank you so much for your time. And I really hope you enjoyed today. And, you know, there's so many people that are just thrilled to have you a part and to continue to see your trajectory in hockey, myself included. So thank you.
That means a lot. Thanks, Erica.
So Rachel, I mean, we heard a little bit from Jessica Campbell. Also, I loved her favorite chirp because it's like, it's good advice, but also like it's low-key shady. You know, like bend your knees. I love that. So if you want to watch the full interview with Jessica Campbell, make sure you head over to Locked On NHL on YouTube, where you can watch the video. We'll also post the audio for our audio listeners. But Rachel, you know, again, want to talk about what this takeover tour means for the business of the league. We know that the first two stops, Climate Pledge Arena, saw a crowd of 12,608. That's a little bit, just a tick lower than what they had for the rivalry series a couple of years ago. And Detroit actually holds the USA record at 13,736. Minnesota, PWHL Minnesota, got pretty close to that in the regular season. Vancouver got 19,038 fans at Rogers Arena. So it seems like being in NHL markets definitely can pull for these kind of one-off events. But what would it look like? What are the criteria that the PWHL are looking for when it comes to selecting potential cities and, of course, venues? Well, we spoke to Amy Shearer about that, Jessica Campbell, and more.
Just wanted to ask you a few questions about obviously this activation and then just the league overall. But first stop for this year's Takeover tour, coming to Climate Pledge Arena. I can tell you for sure that Seattle sports fans are very excited to have women's hockey back. What are the expectations for tomorrow?
I think tomorrow the expectation is that we have 11,500 fans in the building who are excited to see the PWHL players. I know Boston and Montreal are going to put on a great show. Our game presentation is going to be great as well. And so looking for a fun day of hockey where everybody can appreciate the level of skill that our players bring to the ice.
And we got to speak with head coach Corey Chevery, who is kind of in lockstep when it comes to Jessica Campbell making history on the NHL side for women. But she talked about how important it is for people like herself, for Coach Campbell, to continue to make strides so that there are even players that are going to be on the ice tomorrow that know that there's a future forward. What do you see as the league's role in being able to kind of catapult those stories and those opportunities?
Listen, it's our responsibility to make space for women, whether it's on the ice or whether it's off the ice. So if you look at our business structure, the majority are women. And obviously, if you look at our coaching, majority are women. And so it's our job to make space for women. And I think on the next rink over, we've got a clinic going on. So we got 50 or so kids that are getting some coaching. We've got community programs that are going to start running, and camps and clinics across all of our cities. So it's our job to get little girls on the ice, and not just get them on the ice, but to keep them on the ice. And so it's important that we create a pipeline for the league as we grow as well. So whether on the ice or off the ice, it is very much our responsibility to make space for women.
And last time I heard you speak about the league was at the Sportigo event, which I think was a week before the official announcement of the RFPs, and that you're putting out kind of asks for, cities that are interested in expanding. Of course, people want to know, is Seattle a part of that long-term plan when it comes to the PWHL?
Well, I think I have not purposely said what cities are interested, but I have said that from an expansion standpoint, like we're doing these neutral site games, not just to grow the audience, but to understand what kind of turnout we have, how do the fans engage with us, how does the hockey team here, the NHL team engage with us? How does the building engage with us, right? I don't want to say it's a test, but it certainly gives us a little bit of a pulse of the city. And so these are small signs of what it could look like if we were to expand to the cities that we're playing in. We've got several cities that are interested, and so once we finish collecting the RFPs, we'll do our homework and decide whether we expand or not.
And I also want to ask maybe more of a sports business question, but because we're in Seattle, a lot of conversation, maybe even as early as next month, that the NBA could return. When you think of expansion and where the PWHL fits on the sports calendar, are there any things that are a little more difficult? Not to say that they're, non-starters, but are there things or scenarios that are more difficult, or probably the question you'd be more willing to answer is, are there things that make it easier when you think of cities that have multiple sports, not just on the women's side, but the men's side as well?
Yeah, of course. When you look at the arenas, who the tenants are, who plays there, it's hard to get dates, right? I would love to play a game in Madison Square Garden, right? But when you've got the Knicks, the Rangers, the concerts, it's tough to play there. And so that is certainly a factor. We need 15 home dates for our teams to play, and you don't want to play on Monday nights. How many games could we get on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday when fans are more apt to show up? So, sure, that is one of the factors, but when we look at a city and we rate a city, there's probably 20 different things that we look at. Arena dates are certainly one of them. It's important.
Well, I thank you for your time.
Yeah, of course.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thanks,
absolutely.
Erica. Absolutely.
So again, that was Amy Shearer, VP of the PWHL, talking about a lot of different things, Rachel, and intentionally not telling us what cities are interested. I was like, come on. I tried. I did try.
Yeah, that was a valiant effort there. One of the interesting things that she didn't talk about in that clip, but I think, I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of these takeover tour city stops, right, that maybe take away a little bit from the home fan experience of some of these existing teams. And, the flip side of that for me anyway, on the why you do this sort of takeover tour, in addition to the expansion talk, is the just gaining new eyeballs on it, and how she, on the business side, can sell a broadcast deal and say, it's not just these 6 markets that we have, it's fans across the country, and you can see that they show up in person when they're there, right?
That is, a good point. Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully that will mean a national deal for the US as far as broadcast and distribution.
Listen, a girl can dream. A girl can dream.
Well, we do know there is more action in the PWHL, including another takeover tour before our next episode. So coming up on the Women's Hockey Report, we're going to get you ready for the week to come and give you our respective game of the week, the one that we are absolutely going to watch. That's coming up on the Women's Hockey Report. And this episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by our friends at Game Time. I absolutely love the Game Time app. Now, usually, Rachel, I use it when I'm in Seattle. I can catch some Mariners games if I'm covering the Seattle Storm. If they find themselves in the playoffs, maybe I'll even check that out when I'm covering the training camp for the Seattle Kraken. But either way, I love that I can check out the views from the seats that I'm thinking of. I like to sit third base. That's my favorite. I also love the new feature on Game Time where you can toggle to have the final price, all fees, everything included. Because, I got a ball out here on a budget, but there's so many other great things that you can find over at Game Time, including, they have this Game Time Picks feature, and this feature will filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I kind of like looking for my specific seat, but you can let Game Time do the work if you're just looking to get a ticket. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, just download the app, create that account, and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Rachel, it's been a jam-packed episode, and we could have gone into so much more. Erin Ambrose talking, Laura Stacey talked to us. So just make sure that you check out especially the shorts over on Locked On NHL, because we'll have some bonus video content on the YouTube page. And again, some of the interviews we will have available as their own separate videos, both on YouTube and for our audio listeners. But Rachel, it is now time to go over the week that's coming up. And the way that we're going to do this in the PWHL is you and I are both going to give a pick for our game of the week, the game that we absolutely have circled on our calendar and are going to be, if you will, locked in on. So Rachel, you go first. What game do you have circled this week?
Well, this is deeply personal to me because Sunday, January 12th is my birthday, and I will be going to the Toronto Scepters versus New York Sirens game to celebrate. And it's actually an important game for both of these teams as well. You know, New York started off really strong. They've fallen a little bit in the standings. You know, can they recover against a Toronto team who is at the bottom of the league right now and needs to find a way to win in order to kind of reestablish themselves? They've been just all over the place in terms of inconsistent play. And so I really feel like this will be a good game because both teams have a lot at stake if they want to get into solid playoff position.
Yeah, that's a great pick. And happy birthday, Rachel. Join me in the comments and wishing Rachel a happy birthday. Hope you enjoy the game. Cannot wait to hear about it. I'm going to stick with the theme. I'm in my Takeover tour hoodie. I'm going to go with Montreal, Minnesota in Denver, the next stop on the Takeover tour. I'm very curious what this Montreal team can continue to build. We talked about how they are just a grinded out team. They want to create some separation between themselves and Minnesota. And this game, obviously, with the head-to-head, is a way to do that. I will give a little special shout out, though. Ottawa plays 2 games throughout the next week. They're going to play today, January 11th, 2 p.m. against Boston in Boston. And then they also have a game against Toronto on Tuesday, January 14th. Now, Ottawa is a team that they haven't always put everything together. You and I both did pick them, though, to win that trade with Toronto. So we see that they're in 3rd place right now in the standings, just with some of the, some of the teams that have struggled in the last week or so. So I'm curious to see if this is the real deal. Like, is this the real for Ottawa? Was that trade something that could propel them to the top 3 and them sustain that? I think I still have some questions, but as we said, all of these teams are still trying to find their peak or get to a more consistent play. So I'm kind of rooting for the Charge in that respect. No disrespect to Toronto or Boston, but I'm very curious what Ottawa can do. And I feel like you and I have talked about this. I do have a soft spot in my heart for all teams Czechia. So there's a lot of Team Czechia love on the Ottawa team, from the bench boss all the way through. So that's why I am going to do that. Well, speaking of Czechia, we know that Women's Worlds, we have the semifinals coming up at the time that we're recording this, and then of course we have the medals coming up on Sunday, but it's going to be Canada versus Czechia 2024 rematch, where at the U18 level, Czechia took Canada out. They did not compete for a gold medal at the U18 Worlds last year. Now, Canada has already defeated Czechia in this particular tournament, Rachel, but I think it's still going to be a pretty good game.
I think so too. And I think that Canada has kind of recovered from that, and they have established themselves mightily in this tournament, to the point where they even defeated Japan in an earlier game 17-0.
Brutal.
And I know Japan and the Slovaks are part of the relegation game, but even so, like it's that's brutal, but also shows the dominance of
Yeah.
Canada in their U18 program right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it. I think that they really were like, we're not getting punked again. That's kind of how I feel about it. They were like, we're not getting
Yep.
punked again. So it'll be a good challenge for Czechia to see, because I do think at all levels, even in the senior level, I mean, we've seen them really make strides. They want to be what Finland, Switzerland, and Sweden have been for so many years on the women's side, both at the senior level and, of course, in their junior programs. And I think they're making a really strong case. Speaking of Sweden, the USA will take on Sweden. Now, at the senior level, especially, Sweden's kind of fallen out of favor, Rachel, and in a pretty brutal way. I feel like we've talked about that on our, again, different iterations of the Women's Hockey Report and things of that nature. But they have a big task ahead of them, because they will take on the United States, and the US of A has the best goaltender, at least by percentage, because I think you could argue shot volume, definitely a thing, but hey, I love good defense. And so they're taking on the best goaltender, Morgan Stickney, 4 wins. She has only let in 1 goal against all tournament, or the US has only let in 1 goal all tournament. But also, Sweden has the second best goaltender in the tournament. So I'm curious to see if this is going to be kind of just a shootout. Are the offenses just going to be super high octane, especially on the USA side? Or are we going to see a tight game? It could still be a lot of goals and be a tight 1-goal game with these two teams. But Rachel, what are you kind of expecting from this one?
Well, I did watch their preliminary round game, which was 3-0 for Team USA. But that score, I think, doesn't necessarily reflect how well Sweden played defensively in that game. Now, USA, I think, had times of being inconsistent. Their passes weren't crisp, but they managed to sneak in a few goals in this one. But I don't think it was as one-sided as a 3-0 score would suggest. And Helga, you're mentioning the Swedish goaltender, phenomenal in net, absolutely phenomenal. And so I think this could be a tighter game. Now, has USA, gone forward in the tournament and developed more of a scoring touch? Yes. So that could factor into it as well.
Yeah, they've got multiple scorers, multiple goal scorers in this tournament. But I think you're right. If there is a team that can really hunker down defensively, and Sweden might be that, there are ways that USA can be exposed, because some of the habits, they just haven't, quite honestly, with some of the scores, they haven't had to be disciplined to have to keep that for a full game. So I'm very curious to see. Just really quick, we've got the top 2 scorers in the tournament, both coming from Canada. Maxine Simorini leads with 10 points, 4 goals, 6 assists. Striker Zablocki with 9 points, 6 goals, 3 assists. Nella Luposanova, we've definitely talked about this young team phenom, also has 9 points. The split there is 4 goals, 5 assists. Had a hat trick, but Slovakia, just as a team, still struggling. As you mentioned, they will play Japan for relegation. What that means is the winner of that team will stay in the top division. The loser of that will be relegated to a lower division. Bella Finale for USA, 7 points, so is leading USA goal scorer. But again, you're seeing that it's not just US Canada at the top of the table, especially on the scoring side. And we talked a little bit about goaltending as well. Wow, what a jam-packed episode. Rachel, by the next time we hop on the mics for the Women's Hockey Report, we will know who won U18s. And we are hoping to, throughout the rest of the hockey season, get to talk to some hockey minds about, should there be an equivalent of World Juniors on the women's side? I spoke to Jessica Campbell a little bit about that, but we'll break that down for another episode. But for Rachel Donner, Erica L. Ayala here, and thank you for making the Women's Hockey Report part of your Saturday listening. For your second listen, you can check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. You can find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to Locked On NHL, Locked On Flyers, Locked On Kraken, and of course, the Women's Hockey Report. But once again, for Rachel Donner, Erica L. Ayala, enjoy the games this weekend, and we will catch you next Saturday. Peace out, everybody.